invite Women's President Bess Vanzandwyk to give her presentation on the activity of the Women's Caucus over the past year, and I see that Bess has a helper.
Hi everyone, this is Wallace. He's probably the youngest NFU member here, but he's gonna give me a hand. I'm just gonna take a breath. I can't tell you how amazing it feels to see each and every one of you. And for those of you that are joining us online, it's amazing that you are able to do so and that we can connect and we can learn and grow together. I'm gonna do two things here. One is that I really quite like what Coral and I discussed and the message that we sent in your convention package today. So I'm going to read parts of that to ensure that, some of the learnings and teachings that I've learned over the last several years, but in particular this year, I can share and articulate, including a few additional exciting things that are happening within the caucus that I'd like to touch on that have kind of bubbled up in the last week or so. So we are very pleased. I'm going to start by at the beginning of the convention. You might have seen some NFU women being highlighted. We got some funding this year through the Why Hunger campaign to hire a staff person, Rebecca MacInnis, to help us explore a culture of inclusion in agriculture. And through that, we really thank the NFU women who shared a little bit essence of who they are and provide a little bit of what resilience looks like to them on their farm. So I hear that through the convention week, you will be seeing those highlights, and feel free. Some of those women are in the room today, so feel free to connect and share with them. This address has been a difficult one to pen. As farmers, we've all felt the impact on this global pandemic and climate crisis in many different and complex ways over the course of the past few years. The very nature in which we live, gather, and connect has been altered, and yet many parts of the country are trying to chug along as if nothing has changed. And the ripple effects, including often felt feelings of hopelessness, make insurmountable daily tasks, let alone tackling the larger challenges facing the environment, farmers, and our communities. They make us feel a little bit hopeless sometimes, and I just wanted to acknowledge that because anyways, I just want to acknowledge that. The Women's Caucus met several times over the winter and spring months, and again this fall, to continue our work of acknowledging and celebrating the unique perspectives we bring and the roles we fall into as femme farmers. We want to thank all of the regional advisors and board caucus members who were able to join our meetings and share their stories and perspectives this year. As a caucus, we felt it was our responsibility to make space for gender diversity, so we spent much of our time discussing and planning that Why Hunger campaign that was kind of the feature for the Women's Caucus this year. We asked our women and other gendered members to share their ideas about resilience at a time when the challenges of farming and home economics have never been greater and harder to juggle. With the price of off-farm food and fuel are on the rise, we're operating within a food system that doesn't value soil health, nutrient density, and farmers. One thing I want to acknowledge is that I loved this idea, but we were asking more at a time when everybody was struggling and trying to face all of these challenges. And with that, we've been having discussions as to what does real support and how can we connect with one another and support each other through this time. Our caucus continued tomorrow the consultation about the passage of natural universal childcare. We're happy to report that all of the provinces now have signed on. However, there continues to be a shortage of licensed childcare facilities and the staff to provide this care, especially in rural and remote areas. One thing I have to say is the power of connecting is that even with half of a day of convention under our belts, I've already connected with somebody in this very room that's going to continue to work on rural inclusion and cooperative development for childcare. And this is why we need to gather, is that there's so many of us working on solutions, but we're in these little pockets and we're not necessarily tethered together. So I thank you so much for the connection we've had. The pandemic highlighted the considerable stress farm women experience while scrambling to perform many simultaneous responsibilities, including operating their farms, parenting, and working an off-farm job. Ensuring funding and affordable and accessible childcare to ensure that women caregivers can participate in our democratic processes has been an issue that our caucus has historically taken up and is an issue we plan to continue to share our perspective on. As we join our NFU peers this week to connect, debate, and learn together using the democratic process, we need to ask what opportunities exist to support one another in our care for the land, our farms, and our communities, our families, and ourselves. We can look to our NFU peers of the past who have gathered, shared stories of their struggles, and discussed opportunities and solutions for the future. Today, we are privileged to sit on the NFU board table alongside elected Black, Indigenous people of color, our BIPOC president and vice president, and continued the NFU legacy of facing challenging conversations to ensure each perspective is heard and respected. We have so much to learn from each other, and I truly believe that our diversity is our strength. As we share space and stories this week, in person and virtually, let's remember that connection is how we weave the fabric of community, and that the connection is the foundation of the incredible work of our NFU community and has been able to achieve over the past 53 years. Gathering members from across the country is the magic of our national convention, and we fuel so many of us to keep working towards the future we like to see. I would like to challenge you all to embrace this time as a form of self-care, and to remember how even the most challenging conversations can inspire us to think beyond what we know and to expand our minds to think in more community-minded ways instead of only out of our own self-interest. Together, we can generate our relationships, ourselves, and each other, and the land we all share a common love for. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that I got to express that. Some of the fun things that are happening in the next little bit is we had a meeting last week as a caucus, and the NFU Women's Caucus has been historical members of the ACWW, which is the Associated Country Women of the World. This has been something I've been aware of for years, and as a women's president, this year I started to ask a few questions about that. And I found out that historically, there was a triannual world conference that was held in Canada, and our past women members were part of generating income and actually fundraising to host this event. And with that, we actually have the potential capacity to actually have some funds to send some delegates to actually connect with the ACWW. They are meeting in May in Kuala Lumpur, and I've reached out to the Women's Institute Canada area president, who we have a strong relationship with, and I found out that there are other women delegates from Canada that are going to be going to that conference. I'm just going to plant this seed with our Women's Caucus and our women's members who take on roles throughout the union and in your homes and communities, that we should look at how we can reach out and connect with other women of the land across the world. Listen to their policies, their resolutions. Historically, we've actually come and brought forth resolutions at their conventions to have a voice for food sovereignty. And so, with that, I would just like to encourage us women this week to gather when possible. I am going to be down for breakfast on Friday morning at 8:30, and if anybody would like to, in person, come and join me for further discussion on some of the opportunities for the caucus and some of the work we'd like to see. It has been hard to not be in person for a really long time, and as much as I would love to join with everybody who's joining virtually, I think it's really important that we take the time to connect while we're here all together. And with that, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bess, and thank you, Wallace. I now invite, where are we at here? Our youth president, Jessie MacInnis, to present the Youth Caucus report. Jessie, there you are.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. It's good to see so many familiar faces and new faces alike. When I stepped into this role last year, it was on the shoulders of a number of very strong youth presidents, many of whom I've had the opportunity to get to know over the last few years. And it was also at a time when things were feeling a little bit fractured. No one had seen each other in person in a number of years, and I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the first step to take. Fortunately, we came into some funds this year, and the Youth Caucus was also able to hire a very part-time staff person. His name's Paul Wortman. He lives, like I do, in Mi'kma'ki and has a small farm and a family there. And Paul is a trained facilitator and a fantastic one at that. And so with him along for the ride, as well as Amber, the three of us took the time this year to really try to reconnect with one another and to bring on board the growing number of young members that have been joining the NFU over the last year. So with that as the backdrop, I would say that was kind of the framing of how we approached this year, was that we were trying to promote some new growth, some new enthusiasm within the Youth Caucus. And this also built on the shoulders of having put out the Who Will Feed Us report that came out in November, which has been a really exciting tool to be able to use. And I know I've used it a number of times when I've been speaking with policymakers or nonprofits, because if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, at the end, there's about 10 pages that outline not only things that we'd like to see change in agriculture and food systems in Canada, but specific policy recommendations that we as new and young farmers and farm workers would like to see take root in our policy in Canada. So in January, Paul, our staff person, helped us facilitate a strategic planning session, and we came up with 4 what he called buckets of work, or sort of themes to guide our discussions throughout the year. And those 4 were land access and alternative land tenure models, advocacy for fair wages and fair labor, reconnecting the youth members of the NFU, and building a capacity for solidarity and decolonization and anti-racism. So over the year, we did have some opportunities to connect online, and I think right now, though we don't necessarily have any policy campaigns going on, I'm really excited about the platform that we're building and the relationships that we've been forming. And this is going to reach new heights when we reinstate the youth retreats that are going to start happening again this coming February in Mi'kma'ki. We're holding it at the Ulnuig Education Center, a Mi'kmaq-owned and operated education center. And that will be intended for existing NFU youth leaders to come together, deepen our relationships, build our trust with one another, and expand our organizing capacity, and also maybe dig into a little bit of theoretical learning with one another about food sovereignty and agroecology. So I'm really excited for that. Another thing that I can't overlook is the fantastic podcast that came out this year, and I hope that many of you have had the chance to listen to it. It's called, similar to the report that came out, it's called Who Will Feed Us? And it's 10 episodes long and hosted and written and produced by a number of dedicated NFU youth members. And there's lots of fantastic interviews. So if you haven't yet, you can find that podcast anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And they're all relatively short, 20 to 30 minutes, so they're very digestible and super interesting. So I'd like to just close by saying how truly humbled and proud I am to see the ways that youth members of the NFU are really stepping up and taking over leadership roles. When I first joined the NFU in 2017, I think it was 2017, I remember being at convention and being a little bit surprised by how few youth were there. And I know this hasn't been the norm throughout the history of the NFU. There's always been a robust youth presence. But I think over the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a resurgence of youth activity and interest. And I'm so pleased about how many young people are now running a number of committees, working groups, sitting on the board. These are not easy tasks, and a lot of us are in very precarious economic situations, as many of us are as farmers. Many people don't have access to land. Many people may have access to land, but still can't afford to, upgrade their farms and get things on the go. And nevertheless, there are young folks that are now organizing the very active Farm Workers Committee, the BIPOC Caucus, the Farmland Committee, the Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group, the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group, the IPC. There's probably a bunch that I'm missing too, but I'm just so proud and encouraged by the number of young people that are getting involved and really stepping up to try to shape the type of union that we want to see going forward. And I think we're at a bit of a we're at a bit of a pivotal point in agriculture in Canada. There's a generational crisis unfolding. There's really no easy way for succession to unfold, and there's not really a plan in place to know how that's going to happen. And the fact that there are so many young people taking time out of their busy lives and often very underpaid lives to volunteer for these roles is really encouraging. So for those members who have been around for a long time, if you see some folks that you've never met before, I encourage you to introduce yourselves and have a conversation and ask the new folks here what brought them here, what excites them, and what they're working towards, and what they need from the older generation in order to really fulfill this sort of new generation of farmers who are trying desperately to get onto the land and to steward it in positive ways. So I think I will leave it at that, and I thank you very much for listening. Looking forward to chatting with all of you.
Thank you, Jessie. It is certainly inspiring to see all of the young farmers here, not just on the land, but here participating. Thank you. Our next report is from the BIPOC president, Cheyenne Sundance. Cheyenne, there you are.
Hi, everyone. Some of the people who work with me are here today, and I'm really excited to see them, but also everyone else. Some of you haven't met me before. My name is Cheyenne Sundance, and I run Sundance Harvest, which is now 1.5 acre farm, but next year is a 3 acre farm with layer production as well. So I'm going to be talking about becoming the BIPOC president, the caucus, and what happened this year. I will say this, when it started, I did push the start, but its actual inception, its creation, and its growth isn't alone with me. It's also with everyone in the caucus. I can see some people here today, which I'm smiling at, and I think that's quite important to also note. So with the caucus this year, this was really the first full year of the caucus kind of being alive and breathing and an organism in itself. So after discussions within meetings, we decided to have an in-person day. And through this caucus and the Google group and all of that stuff, technology is great, but there's nothing like meeting in person, talking, and getting to know each other. So we had that at Vintage Soil Farm near Kemptville in Ontario, where many, many farmers of color came. Some people in the room today were actually there. And they saw Vintage Soil, Isabel's farm, how things were running, and they learned about market gardening on a larger scale. That allowed trust to be built, community to start to be formed, and one of the 3 goals that we have to actually be incorporated into the caucus's framework. So one of them was, as most of you know, if you have the little quarterly here, is the need for community networks. So a lot of us are branched out, as many of you know, like farmers across Canada. So some people are in Quebec, some people are in British Columbia, some people are in Ontario. So having a core network and a way to communicate is important, which is why for next year, using some of the funds to actually not just have Ontario events, even though Ontario's, it's fun to be in Ontario, but to have ones in BC with people who are revolutionary, doing amazing seed growing and seed saving work, for example, and bringing in their community as well. To have some in the East Coast, right? To utilize those people and those networks. So it's really beautiful that we're having conversations within the caucus, individually, but also as a group, about, okay, let's not think Ontario is all that, because it's all right, but it's not all that. So we have, East Coast, we have West Coast, and then people could allow more memberships and more people to understand what's happening within the caucus and as a whole. So the second kind of thing we talked about was, of course, the need for technical skills and training. For Sundance Harvest, most of you know I started this by myself in 2019, no income whatsoever. And now we have multiple staff, up to 6 staff next year, but mine is the superstar. So with Sundance Harvest in itself, technical training was my biggest hurdle. I still don't know how to drive a tractor, and my friends do. So why not go back in time, almost what so many villages, societies had, which is skill sharing, community sharing, learning skills from your neighbor, talking to each other and saying, hey, you know how to do this really cool thing. Maybe you can show me. So with technical skill training, using some of the funding that we got from the Cosmari grant to go to a farm where someone has a tractor, learn how to use a tractor, learn how to use a BCS, learn how to fix a BCS, because that's something that we need to know sometimes. And other essential skills that you maybe can't read a book because you need that hands-on, being in the moment experience. And this will actually allow many farms to scale beyond 1 acre and thus be more efficient and thus more sustainable financially. As I'm noticing Sundance Harvest is scaling, I can make way more from a bed of carrots if I don't do it by hand, if I do it by BCS. So I can only imagine what tractor work would be like. So the last thing is need for access to capital. This also includes sustainable land tenure. So things like community land trusts and long-term land leases are the most important thing to me right now. As some of you probably know, I've been really traveling across Canada this whole summer. I went to Quebec near Wakefield to meet the people at Bibliothèque, which is actually a cooperative-owned community land trust that has established land so it can never be sold to developers. And they're developing so many beautiful farming projects there, and I'm working with them right now. I also went to Kawartha Lakes. I drove right up there to a Wagyu beef farm called Merkaba Acres, run by an awesome BIPOC woman with her mother, actually, and they raise meat, and it's super cool. And I don't want to talk about every single one I went to, because honestly, there was a lot when I'm looking at it, but I also went to Vancouver, BC, met up with some land matching folks from the young agrarians and some BIPOC farmers there and learning what they're doing. So really taking all the 15 farms I visited this summer and writing an end-of-year report to be shared with everyone with pictures, photos, and videos to really show you that these 3 goals exist. They are alive and well. It's just we need to bring the communities together to share these things and to share the knowledge and to spread awareness. So I would say I'm very excited about next year. Obviously, I will say like a really big piece of the caucus being organized is Camille. Camille has been probably one of the biggest pieces to this caucus, actually. Yeah, when I can't do meetings, Camille is there. And she's really made everything streamlined in a way that, you know, I can talk and verbalize, but it's hard for me to write things down. So having a community support has been honestly the biggest help to this caucus, but I'm very excited to talk about it. I'm around if you want to talk, but I just said this all off my head, so that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you for your report, Cheyenne, and thank you for all the energy that you and all your helpers have put into developing the BIPOC caucus. I'll now entertain a motion to receive the reports of the president, the women's president, the youth president, and the BIPOC president. Would someone please make that motion? Yes.
Point of information?
Yes.
Are we doing the IPC report now or after?
That apparently comes next.
Okay.
These are the president reports. Would someone make the motion to receive these reports? Can you say your name louder, please? Thank you. People all look the same behind their masks. Jen Penning. Do we have a seconder to this motion? Say your name. Anastasia. Thank you. That motion is moved and seconded. All in favor, please raise your cards. If you're online, please raise your hand. All right, put them down. And we'll look to our online. Okay, if you're opposed, please raise your cards. If you're online, raise your hand in opposition. Seeing no opposition, that motion is carried. All right, now we move to the IPC report. And I don't know why they're treated separately, but that's what it says. I now invite Terran, say that again louder, Giacomini, Terran Giacomini, and Amber Dyck to present the International Programs Committee IPC report.
Hi, everyone. I'm wondering, tech support question, is Terran, oh yeah, there she is, great, she can share. So I'm gonna start and then we'll pass it over to Terran to do the second half. Closer, okay. So a little background on the IPC, it's the International Programs Committee, and it's tasked with coordinating and strengthening the NFU's international solidarity work, both at home and abroad. It's based on an understanding that because the problems facing family farms are global and connected, we must fight for food sovereignty globally and build solidarity. So there's three main focuses of the IPC. There's our work with La Via Campesina movement, of which the NFU is a founding member. There's the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group, and then there's the Migrant Solidarity Working Group. And before we give an update on these three areas of work, it's important to mention that since the NFU convention in 2021, the IPC has grown and changed quite a bit. We have two new chairs, myself and Celeste Smith, and a new coordinator, Terran. This year we did a lot of work to support the transition of these roles and to develop and incorporate new ideas and visions for how we can work together more effectively as we juggle all the exciting work we want to do together across the three areas. So from April to October, the IPC engaged in a series of sharing circles led by Celeste and myself a little bit, and drawing on Indigenous methodologies shared by Celeste, who is an Indigenous seedkeeper. She's Haudenosaunee Oneida. This vision is just now reaching a point where we are very close to implementing new changes to fully support each of the areas of focus under the IPC umbrella and create opportunities for collaboration between these groups. Currently, we're working on updating our terms of reference and revising the website, both of which we hope to finalize in the new year. And they're both very outdated at the moment. So I'll speak a little bit about the La Via Campesina international work, and then Terran will speak from the others. So a little bit of background on La Via Campesina is it's a global movement that brings together organizations representing small and medium-scale farmers, peasants, agriculture workers, rural women, and Indigenous communities. It's a pluralistic, democratic, and multicultural and nonpartisan movement. It is a strong voice on the international stage for deep systematic change to the food system and to build food sovereignty and agroecology. It is a decentralized and grassroots movement, meaning that policies are shaped by the member organizations. La Via Campesina does not exist without its members, just like the NFU. The principles of autonomy and diversity are very important within the movement. We highlight 7 specific actions in which the NFU members have participated in international solidarity work with La Via Campesina this year. For the purposes of this representation, we just summarize briefly, so I'm just gonna scroll through. This whole report is also available. I'm not gonna read it all. So the first one was engagement with the civil society and Indigenous peoples mechanism on the Committee on World Food Security and the UN Food and Agriculture Organizations, which Jessie, MacInnis, and Nettie Wiebe participate in. And there's ongoing participation in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, which also Jessie has been very engaged in. Then on April 17th, there was a solidarity statement for the the International Day of Peasant Struggle. And I think it was already mentioned also that in June, Celeste went to the World Trade Ministerial meeting in Geneva. I think Will mentioned this. And also the solidarity work with the Philippines Farmers Defending Human Rights. There's an ongoing relationship building process there. And Celeste and Terran were just in Egypt at COP27 as part of the La Via Campesina delegation. Okay, Terran, over to you. Do your thing, tech people.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can hear myself as well, so is there a way to control that? There's like an echo. That's okay. I'll just go with it. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here with you all virtually. Maybe one day we'll be in metaverse together. That would be really crazy, but interesting. So I'm your international programs coordinator. I'll be reporting on the two other work streams held under the umbrella of the IPC, the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group and the Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group. The Indigenous Solidarity Working Group was launched in 2015 to extend and deepen the NFU's understanding of Indigenous food sovereignty and settler colonialism in Canada. The intention of the group is to provide a space for learning and relationship building to better act in solidarity with Indigenous peoples who are fighting to defend their territories and rights. The co-chairs of this group are Ayla Fenton and Brianna Kenny, and a big thank you and shout out to them. So I'll give three main highlights from the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group this year. In May, members of the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group worked with our partners in the Relational Accountability for Indigenous Rematriation Collective, or the RARE Collective, which is a group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars and community organizers. Together, they developed an encounter on rematriation where participants included both landowners and land-seeking people, and the idea is to continue this work to build relationships around alternative land tenure models, land sharing, and land back and decolonization. Since June, the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group has been deepening trust and friendship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous members of the NFU, recognizing that Indigenous and non-Indigenous farmers critically need opportunities for learning and relationship building toward decolonization. Folks within the group came up with the idea to hold a series of online and in-person learning circles that will be based on Indigenous methodologies and teachings and led by Indigenous NFU members. So we applied for a grant and were successful. We just found out this week that we now have a grant from the Catherine Donnelly Foundation to support staff hours, honoraria for Indigenous facilitators and participants, and for learning materials. So this work will begin in January. And then finally, just to highlight, we did a lot of work reflecting and sort of expressing some commitment to solidarity with Indigenous peoples by writing some statements this year around International Indigenous Peoples Day in June 21st and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th. And I'm including links to both of those in the notes here. So if you're interested in participating in the ISWG, you can contact me, Terran, the IPC coordinator at nfu.ca. The Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group supports migrant worker calls for justice in Canada and abroad. The Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group takes every opportunity to let the Canadian government know that the NFU is in favor of significant transformations to temporary foreign work programs, transformations that will ensure fundamental rights and dignity to these essential workers. The co-chairs of this group are Jen Fenning and Cheyenne Sundance. Big shout out to them and lots of gratitude for your work this year. Some highlights from the Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group include I think Will mentioned a number of these, so I'll just go through them pretty quickly. We had a statement on May Day calling for permanent residency for migrant farm workers, a statement voicing support for Jamaican farm workers who wrote an open letter to the Jamaican Minister of Labor, which included the call for, among other reforms, open work permits that are not tied to a single employer, and the granting of permanent resident status to all migrant workers. We wrote an open letter to Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Sean Fraser, on the parliamentary motion M44, which proposed the expansion of an economic immigration stream to allow workers of all skill levels, including agricultural workers, pathways to permanent residency. Unfortunately, this strategy proposed by the government released this September does not create a permanent residency pathway for migrant agricultural workers, but we continue our struggle to fight for this. And then finally, members of this group played an important role in the NFU ad hoc labor group this September by assisting in the preparation of a help sheet for NFU members to respond to the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's consultation survey. The NFU ad hoc labor group suggested members respond to the survey by insisting that, among other supports, that agricultural labor strategy must include the granting of open work permits and permanent residency to migrant workers. So the Migrant Worker Solidarity Working Group is an important space for building awareness of the struggles of migrant workers in Canadian agriculture and for building solidarity with migrant workers. All NFU members are welcome to participate, and we especially call for participation from farm employers of migrant workers themselves, and resident farm workers. I'll conclude with just saying that the IPC funding all comes from external grants currently, and a big thank you to our funders, Inter Pares, Y Hunger, and then soon to be the Catherine Donnelly Foundation. Also, in the future, we'll be doing a lot of work that ties into the UFCW grant for farm worker organizing, and also the National Farmer Foundation. So the IPC is vibrant.